There was a belief that through the legal process, we could help end poverty.
It was at the tail end of the civil rights movement of the 60s. There was a sense of activism. We were all very optimistic. We thought we really could change the world.
Federal money was flowing out across the nation to fund local law offices to provide legal services to the poor. And the Travis County Bar Association applied for and obtained one of those grants. And that, officially, was the beginning of the Travis County Legal Aid and Defender Society.
I got hired as the chief investigator. We had to get our offices put together, and they had to hire some lawyers, and they hired a secretary right away.
It was an interesting time. We were there unpacking boxes and putting law books on the shelves and trying to arrange the office space so that it would be friendly.
Here you had an office, located in the neighborhood. Here you had an office of willing attorneys to listen to your problems, and they're not going to charge you. I mean, that was a godsend,
The Blackshear question was urban renewal. There all of a sudden became a large sum of federal monies available to essentially rejuvenate parts of town where housing was substandard.
By the 1960s, people started calling it Negro removal because African Americans had to move from the places where they've lived for decades.
Urban renewal was a systematic governmental effort to destroy a way of life.
In the Blackshear neighborhood, which was basically bounded by Rosewood 12th down to 6th Street, and that area around Houston Tillotson College was one of the old historic black neighborhoods.
There was this huge interdependence in the neighborhood where, for example, the Mackey sisters were blind and had lived in the same location for 90 years. And they managed to get around and take care of themselves because of the neighborhood group that took them to church, brought them groceries, checked on them every day. And there were story after story like that.
The standard was that you could have an urban renewal area and destroy the substandard housing, but there had to be adequate relocation housing for the people who were going to be displaced by the urban renewal project. And there wasn't in this town. There was no adequate housing for the poor. People that lived in substandard lots, they'd have to move out of town.
Legal Aid, particularly John Scanlon and Barbara Kazin, brought suit. My job at that point was to help support the legal actions by organizing the neighborhood, both with petition drive and as well as being plaintiffs in the court decision and protesting the actions.
We would have neighborhood meetings, and then groups from the neighborhood would go to the urban renewal meetings, and either Pat or me or combinations of lawyers would represent the Blackshear Neighborhood Organization. And it was sometimes very, very loud, very bitter. It was real grassroots democracy right where it needed to be.
I think legal aid made a difference. And legal aid not only was useful in helping address the issues, legal aid promoted hope.
It took probably a year, I guess, to get the final result, but we won. They stayed organized for years afterwards. They were very proud of their neighborhood and very proud that they had stood up to the government and got to keep their houses.
The jail, like the prison system, like the old Texas Youth Council, ran somewhat on a building tender system where the inmates ran the asylum. It was brutal, absolutely brutal.
Travis County Jail used to just medicate them. When you came to jail, they would give you so much medication that you were not a problem because you were a zombie. It was pathetic. It was roach infested. I remember one of the commissioners, his solution to dealing with the roaches was to just stomp them.
The old jail had a couple of isolation cells which were holes. I mean, they were literally holes. It was a cement floor with metal walls and a hole in the middle. All of the attorney-client rooms were bugged.
And people started contacting the legal aid office, and we literally wind up filing a class action lawsuit. And it was a class action lawsuit against the sheriff, the commissioners.
It was big news. No one had ever done that. The press was very curious about what possibly could come out of this.
We negotiated the conditions under which inmates would be housed. We negotiated the law library, what would go in. We negotiated the kind of food. We made them increase the medical staff. We negotiated the amount of communication they could have in and out of the jail. We negotiated everything that related to inmates.
Well, the great debate was how much energy should the Legal Aid Society be putting into so-called law reform, and how much should it be concentrating on simply providing legal services for the routine needs of the poor community.
Everyday legal problems that people face, having to do with food, housing, public benefits, Social Security benefits, determinations about whether or not somebody was going to get Social Security disability or not. Subsistence issues were always a high priority.
We try to prevent homelessness so that when families are facing foreclosures on their homes or facing eviction from public or subsidized housing or loss of their Section 8 voucher, we try to help them keep their homes, not end up at a shelter or on the street.
We got dental benefits reinstated for children. I think that made a big difference. That was a state case.
Very little attention was paid to the due process rights of people who were hospitalized. They would be picked up and shipped off, and they would never meet the lawyer, they'd never have a hearing, they never really knew what was going on. Litigating a few cases at the local level changed the whole admission process at the Austin State Hospital.
The most interesting group were the young mothers. They showed a lot of spark, and I saw the help they got from legal aid and whatever their personal life crises were as being a real crutch on which they relied, and many of them went on to really achieve a lot in life.
That the most fun I ever had doing domestic relations for legal aid was the adoptions, because that was a case, that was a situation in which everyone always came out of the courthouse with a smile on their face. There were no losers.
One of the things that made it important to us that all of these young men and women that came in legal aid, because I worked real closely with them, is that they had enthusiasm, they had passion, they really believed in what they were doing.
I think we were very fearless. We were young, we were idealistic. It was a time when the courts were very receptive.
What we did was help to empower people, the residents of areas like Blackshear, Clarksville, St. John.
It's comforting to people who are not part of the power of this country to be able to know that somebody, someplace will help them.
As long as you have poor, as long as you have people with limited resources, you're always going to have a need for legal aid.
We have to have legal aid. We have to have a legal services corporation. We have to have field programs. We have to have staff attorneys out in every community in this country representing people who cannot represent themselves, who cannot afford legal representation, but who have legitimate legal problems that require, if justice is to be done, that they be addressed.
The existence of legal aid has had a far greater impact than you might initially think, because the whole idea of who's entitled to legal services and how should they be delivered isn't just now legal aid, it's the state, the county.
Access to justice, legal services to the poor, is something that is an obligation in this country of everybody, of the taxpayers, of the politicians, of the corporations. Everybody has to be involved in that process for it to work. But the lawyers have got to be our leaders.
I'm gonna let it